getting set up with my folder. I'm gonna name everything that I create in here starting with the word tiles, because I'm gonna put this art into what's called tile maps on Thursday. Tile maps are how we kind of design our scenes in Godot. So the parts that are just part of the scenery. So it's gonna go into my sprite folder, but I'm gonna name everything starting with tiles. Okay, so then going over to Piskel. So one thing that we really need to be careful with is the size of our tiles, more so than we were with the character. So we really need to make sure that our tiles, that we know what size our tiles are. So when I go to the resize in Piskel, the default is 32 by 32 pixels. That's perfectly fine. If you think that's gonna look good for your game, and we'll maybe look at some examples on Thursday. Actually, we'll look at some examples in a little bit after we do the demo. But 32 by 32 is usually going to be fine. You might want to go bigger if you don't want to spend as much time building your tile map. If you want a lot more detail, then you might want to go smaller. The sizes for games are typically in what's called powers of 2. That's why there's these certain random numbers that you keep hearing, like 32, 64, 128, 256. I won't go into too much detail, but the logic behind this is basically that on the way that the computer memory works, numbers that are divisible by 2, are powers of 2, are more efficient to store. Because one piece of computer memory, a bit, can hold 2 numbers. And then as we add bits together, we usually have a byte, which is 8 bits. That can hold, each one of those can hold 2, and the whole thing together can hold between 0 and 255. So 256 values. And so we tend to use these powers of 2 because the memory on the computer can deal with it more efficiently. So powers of 2 is anything, so 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 16 times 2 is 32, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I use numbers like this. So I'm happy with 32 by 32. I'm not going to change this, but I have to know what this number is when I go to design my tile map later. If I get these numbers wrong, if they don't match, it's not going to work in Godot. So that's super important. So my first tile map is just going to be like the simplest, most like ridiculously basic thing. I'm not going to like do any details. I'm just basically making background colors. And that's fine. A lot of games like have no detail. It's just about the gameplay. And so that'll be a good way to demonstrate how to make something super basic. The second tile set I'm going to do, I'll make a little bit more complex, add a little bit more like, scenery and stuff like that. And then I'll have those separate, but we can easily add them together. So for my first tile, I'm just going to like choose a few different types of terrains that I want. So I'm going to choose some grass. I'm just going to fill this in. I might zoom out a little bit. And then I like to add a little bit of texture. You don't even really have to do this much, but usually what I'll do is I'll take the lighten tool and maybe increase my pen size a little bit. And then I'm going to hold shift to just kind of, or actually I'm going to hold shift and command to just kind of add a few darker little dots here. You can really like barely see this, and it doesn't really look like grass, but it just gives a little bit of texture. It's a little too light, so I might make like a darker green and then use my paint pixels to make all of those darker. And that looks pretty good. It's really like the most basic thing in the world. It's not gonna look amazing, but you'll see when we put it into the editor on Thursday that it's pretty functional, essentially. So this will be my grass tile. I'm gonna save this. So I'm gonna save the Piskel file. I'm gonna call this tiles basic. And I'll save this in my originals folder. So this is the Piskel file, not the image that I'm gonna use. So then, if I wanted to be really lazy, what I would do is I would just duplicate this frame and then make like a dirt tile. And I would just use paint all pixels and just choose a couple of like different dirt tiles. So there's like a brown, here's like a dark brown, and there we go. I've already got, I don't need the onion skin on right now. So now I've already got 2 different terrains that I can use. If I want to be a little less lazy, maybe I want to draw like some bigger, like rock type things, just to give this a little bit of a different look. it really doesn't have to be anything too crazy when we're just making kind of our terrain. Of course, you can change the art later very easily. You can also, you know, make stuff more complicated if you want to. So there's my really basic dirt and rock area. I'll just add one here. And let's do one there. Okay. And let's do another one right there. Okay. So then, if I want to make something from scratch, I don't have to keep duplicating stuff. Let's make a little water area. So I'm going to choose like a dark blue and just paint bucket this whole thing. And then I'll, maybe to make some water, I'll choose like a lighter blue. And I'll use my pen for this. I'll just make like some waves. Okay, and then I'll show for this one, if I want to have like a little bit of variety, maybe I'll do that again. So I'll show one example with this one where I'll do a few different types of waves. This actually probably won't look that great, but I'll just use it as an example. So I'll draw some different waves here and there. And then I'll make another frame. I'm using my color palette down here. So if I hit 5 and hit B for bucket, I can fill that in. And then I'll hit 6 and P for pencil. And then I'll draw another set of waves. And then if I want to make variations of my different tiles, you know, I could do that with the green and the dirt. But I'll just demonstrate it with the waves for now, just to keep it simple. So I'm just going to stop there with this one. But you guys can feel free to add more to that. And what I would do, if you want to have more detail, is just make more versions of the same tiles. But there's other types of layering that we could do. So you may not even want like more color, because you could layer on other stuff or more detail. You might just want like some blank colors. You guys can start to figure that out when we work with tile maps on Thursday. So I'm just going to save this and then export. Leave the scale at 1. Or if I want to scale it up, I can, but remember, we really need to know the exact size. So if I scale this up, let's say I like go to 2x, it'll be 64 by 64. I have to know that when I put it into Godot, because it has to match. It can be any number, it just has to match. Anyway, so I'm going to scale at 1. I'm going to stick with the basic sprite sheet, although I might, for this one thing that I might do is do 5 columns and no rows. You'll see why I might do this when we look at it in Godot in a little bit. But for this type of sprite sheet, it might be nicer just to have like a long row. It'll be make it a little bit easier to see in the editor later, but you don't have to do that. So now I'm going to download this. And so this is the PNG. This is going to go in my game. So I have my game, I have my sprites folder, and I'm going to call this tiles basic. So everything I'm using for the scenery has tiles at the beginning, so it'll be easy to find. So I'm going to click save here. And so now I'm going to make a new one that's a little bit more like, you know, actual objects. So I'm going to call this tiles scenery. So this is my new Piskel. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it's just a demo, but I'm just going to draw a few different things that I can place in the world that are like more interesting than just like basically blocks of color. And one thing that I want to show with this is if I want to make objects that are bigger than 32 by 32, I have to be pretty careful about how I do that if I don't want to run into issues later. And so let's say I want like some big trees. I might resize this. I might make this like maybe 128 by 128. So now I can draw like a really big tree, but I may want to like place some other stuff around. I may want to do different stuff. So one thing I can do that will help me with this is if I go to preferences, there's a grid setting, which I don't think we've looked at before, where I can turn on a grid and I can set the spacing. It gives me a few different options. So if I set the spacing to 32 by 32 and I choose, let's choose like a color I probably won't use, like red. Now I can actually see 32 by 32 tiles as I'm drawing my other elements in my scenery. So I have a reference for, basically I don't want to, like I really don't want to draw, for example, if I'm drawing a tree, let's say I'm making a tree, I could make a tree like this, that would be fine. If I wanted to make a tree like this, that would be cool. If I wanted to make a tree like this, that would also be good. You can see that those are all inside of my tiles. What I want to avoid is something like this, like a tree that's like that. Because Godot is going to have a hard time adding that into the tile map. I want to avoid something that's like basically like in the middle of one of these things. So I can use multiple tiles. And one other thing that I'll mention is you probably want to use either 1 by 1, so 1 by 1, or 3 by 3, or like basically you want to avoid stuff that's 2 by 2. That's less important, but you'll see why once we start building the tile maps on Thursday. So let me make like a few variations of trees to add in here. So let me actually choose a different color to make the tree trunk. So if I want to make like a little tree, I would just start with like that. And then if I want to make like a really big tree, I might do like a big trunk like this. Something like that. And if I want to do like a tall skinny tree, maybe I'll just use the rest of this area for a little tall skinny tree, something like that. And then let me change the color to green. And I'm obviously not spending a lot of time on making this look good. That's not really the goal right now. The goal is just to show you guys how to set this up so that it'll work correctly in Godot. Okay, so I have some little trees. I have some leftover space down here. I could fill that in with some stuff, but if I want to just have this be my tree area, I can just move on to the next frame. I'm going to turn the animation off. I don't really need that. Let's make some rocks. So I'll choose like a dark gray color, and I'll have some rocks. Maybe I'll just have like a rock like this, maybe one like that, maybe another one. Just some different rocks. I want to fit inside these tiles. Maybe I'll make like, I don't really need like a huge rock, but I guess I could have like, maybe like a sign or something that I could put some text on if I wanted to. That's not really what a sign looks like. Okay, I'll just do like this. And I'll make like a big sign. Fill that in. So I could write different things on there that might be useful. And then maybe I'll make like some little rock areas. This could be fun to just throw around. Okay, so I've got some rocks. What else do we want in our scene? Maybe just some like grass. I guess we already have grass texture, but maybe I'll just do some like little grassy things like that. And I don't know, maybe I'll do some more with a different color down here. I really just need like, you know, stuff to throw around to make it look like an interesting scene. And then maybe if I want like something kind of nice, I'll have some flowers. So maybe I'll have a few little like flowers down here with some different colors. Maybe I can use these on different levels. So let's do like a little blue flower and a pink flower and a yellow flower, and let's do maybe a really pink flower. That one's more purple. Okay, I have some different flowers, and that's pretty good. Obviously there's a million other things that I could add in here, but the basic point, this is enough stuff to kind of get started with the basic idea. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to export. And with this one, since I have a few different things, I think I'm just going to stick with 2 by 2. The scale is 128 by 128, so that's fine. I'm going to click download here. And so now I have my 2 tiles. You could really make lots and lots of these. I'll show you guys a couple examples in a second. I'm just going to put these into Godot. I'm not going to show you how to set it up, but I'm just going to show you that, I mean, it's just going to load into Godot. So we'll just like take a look at that for a second. But so I can preview these. We've got our basic tiles here and our basic scenery here. And so when I go over to Godot, since I saved these in here, they should be in the sprites folder already. And so we can see the tiles basic, and we can see the tile scenery, so that looks fine. And yeah, we'll make a tile map on Thursday. I'll go over how we're gonna break these apart. So one thing that you might want to look at when you're thinking about what do I need in my tile map, if you go to, I mean, if you Google this, but I'm gonna go to itch.io because this is a site we'll talk about more throughout the semester, but this is basically like an indie game site where people publish games, but they also publish game assets like art and music and sound effects and stuff like that. And so if we look, there's an area for game assets, and there's an area for sprites, tile sets. So you can look at these different things. If we look at a tile set, you'll see kind of like these different tile sets. Some of them are free, some of them they want you to pay for. Some of them there's like a free and a paid version. But you can see there's lots of different kind of styles here. And I'll talk a little bit on Thursday about how to make more complex tiles. But to get started, we just want to do some basic tiles and understand how they work before we try to do anything too complicated. But you can look at some tile maps, and is this one free? I should click on a free one. Let's make sure they're free because I want to download it and just, we can see what it looks like. So let's click free. And okay, this one is free, whoops. So usually you can download these, and sometimes they'll say like, do you want to give me money? And you could if you want, but I'm gonna say no. And I'm just gonna look for Mossy assets. And so then it's gonna download, and we'll just take a look at this for a second. So here's Mossy assets. You can see basically these different tile sets. And so when you put those into a game engine like Godot, the editor can break them up and add them into different parts of your game. That's what we're gonna cover on Thursday. So that would be a good place to get some inspiration and also see what other artists do. There are people who make a living just by being really good at making these types of tile sets and then selling them on Itch or wherever else. So it's a big part of the game development process, and obviously we're covering it very, very quickly. But hopefully this will be a good intro. And yeah, I'll stop there. We'll put this into Godot and learn how to use the tile map on Thursday. For now, you guys can just like work on creating the art, and make sure, just again, I'm gonna say this like a million times, but just make sure you know the size of the tiles. They have to be 32 by 32, 64 by 64, 16 by 16. If they're not one of those things, they're not gonna work very well, and you'll have to redo them. And make sure to just save them as sprite sheets. That's really everything that you have to do. Okay, I'm gonna stop the video here.